The president of the UC system is a Zionist Jew, and he supports the apartheid state of Israel.
When I hear that Israel is an apartheid state, when people make that accusation, depending on the mood that I'm in on the day, I either pack out laughing or I get really, really angry because it's an absolute lie.
Right now, if you say Israel is an apartheid state, I won't believe it because I've been to Israel and it was awesome. We're South African, so we know what apartheid is.
You know, I was born under apartheid. I grew up and lived under apartheid. So when people talk about apartheid, they can't tell me things I do not know. I've been to Israel almost about 14 times, and I've checked Israel from all corners. I've looked at what's happening in the legislature, in the Knesset. I've looked at what's happening in the streets, and I've concluded that what happened in the South Africa that was under the apartheid government does not exist in Israel. Israel is an apartheid state. I don't understand what you're talking about.
Okay. I don't see my face there.
I've been a member of parliament, the South African tribe, for the last 21 years. During apartheid in South Africa, you could never have.
Yes. Did you turn on your video?
I did. I turned on my.
You go to Israel, you find members of the Knesset who are Arabs and Muslims, members of the Knesset who speak against their own government. In South Africa during apartheid, when black people spoke against their government, they were charged for treason.
We couldn't go to the same schools. We couldn't use the same hospitals. In Israel, you have Arabs lying in hospital next to a Jew. In Israel, you have people mingling on the streets, sitting on the same benches. In South Africa, you had signs. Whites only sit here. Whites only drink from this fountain.
Israel doesn't say that because you are not Jewish, you can't go to the beach. Israel doesn't say because you're non-Jewish, you can't go and watch a movie. When we had an apartheid state, when we were in apartheid, that's what they said. You couldn't interact, you couldn't watch movies, you couldn't go to the beach, you couldn't shop in like a big supermarket if you were black during apartheid.
I've been to Israel 4 times, and I can say from my experience that what the media depicts about Israel is not true. It's not real. You know, the hostility that is said about the people of Israel is not there. You know, if anything, they're very warm, friendly, loving people.
Israel was awesome. Everything about it, from the people, the food, the place, the atmosphere there, it's beautiful. Before I went to Israel, I was expecting what I always see in the media. I was expecting to see a lot of shootings, bombings, and yeah, a lot of conflict. But when I went there, I actually saw the opposite. There was so much peace. Going to Tel Aviv, and you see so many young people actually having fun.
There's a lot of sentiment and business acumen that comes from Israel, for me, which kind of tells me that there's something really important happening there.
As a black person, to actually find out the truth is to be like, you're taking something so painful for black South Africans and mispresenting it for either publicity, for directed hate, and then repackaging it and saying it's apartheid. Not cool.
The media and everybody else that's on their side was trying to actually accomplish something that was going to give hope, that was going to give life, that was going to encourage peace. You know, maybe let's have a conversation on that. But how dare you take that and use it to incite violence and use it to incite and encourage the destruction of a people just because you don't like them? That's disgusting. And the world needs to recognize that you are not only doing an injustice to the people that are in the Middle East, you are making what our parents went through, you're making a struggle and mockery.
When you look at what was happening in a lot of Arabic countries in terms of black people, we find them being oppressed. And nobody's paying attention to that or bringing that to light. And that brings to me or says to me that there's bias reporting.
Don't take what you're being fed. Don't take what you read in newspapers. Don't take what you read or what you see on news, rather. Go there and educate yourself. Open a book, a history book. Open a current book. Open anything that actually speaks truth. I got an opportunity to actually go to Israel and seek truth for myself, I can say that. And it was mind-boggling to see just the misconceptions and just how it doesn't add up to what we see on TV.
To my brothers and sisters, specifically in South Africa and specifically like me, that are Black, this war is real. It's a war for our history. It's a war for another nation's survival. There was once a time when people didn't want us to exist, when they didn't believe that we had a right to anything. And if we really want to do justice to our legacy, to do justice to the challenges that we were able to overcome, then we'll not only want to stand in solidarity with Israel and with the truth, but frankly with any nation that's under threat across the world.
The one thing I always advise guys is wisdom is free. And that's what, for me, Israel kind of represents, is that wisdom, is that ancient wisdom. Wisdom where you can really plug into a system that works. So if you ask me, why Israel? I'd say, why not Israel?
We need to look at this as it is. And not be told a lie that's not there.
Hi, my name is Dumisani Washington, and I'm the director of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. I want to talk to you today about Dr. Martin Luther King's pro-Israel legacy. There's a lot of controversy and propaganda surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Both sides choose Dr. King as their champion. So let's take a moment to answer some of the most basic questions. Question number one, was Dr. King pro-Israel? Dr. King was a staunch supporter of the state of Israel and the Jewish people. But this does not mean that he was anti-Palestinian. In fact, he embodied both ideologies, proving that one does not have to be anti-Palestinian to be pro-Israel, or anti-Israel to be pro-Palestinian. We have his own words to that effect. On March 26, 1968, Dr. King was the honored guest at the 68th Annual Convention for the Rabbinical Assembly of Conservative Judaism. Yes, 10 days before he was assassinated, Dr. King was with his good friend, Rabbi Joshua Heschel, and other rabbis as they discussed foreign policy, domestic policy, and a host of other things. At that meeting, he was asked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Dr. King, what would you say if you were talking to a Negro intellectual, an editor of a national magazine, and were told, as I have been, that he supported the Arabs against Israel because color is all important in this world? In the editor's opinion, the Arabs are colored Asians and the Israelis are white Europeans. Would you point out that more than half of the Israelis are Asian Jews with the same pigmentation as Arabs? Or would you suggest that an American Negro should not form judgments on the basis of color? What seems to you an appropriate response? Wow, that's a deep question. Dr. King took the opportunity to address each of the three issues that were presented in that question. Race, the Israelis, the Arabs, or Palestinians. It should be noted that in 1968, the term Palestinian was not yet used to refer to the Arab people of the region. That would not happen until much later on in the mid-1970s. On the Middle East crisis, we have had various responses. The response of some of the so-called young militants does not represent the position of the vast majority of Negroes. There are some who may see a kind of mystique in being colored, and anything non-colored is condemned. We do not follow that course in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and certainly most of the organizations in the civil rights movement do not follow that course. In addressing the issue of race, Dr. King echoed his "I Have a Dream" speech from 5 years earlier, not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. He let the rabbis know that he and the African American community would judge the Middle East issues based on their merits, not on race. Peace for Israel means security, and we must stand with all of our might to protect its right to exist, its territorial integrity. I see Israel, and never mind saying it, as one of the great outposts of democracy in the world, and a marvelous example of what can be done, how desert land almost can be transformed into an oasis of brotherhood and democracy. Peace for Israel means security, and that security must be a reality. After addressing the issue of race, Dr. King then moved to the Israelis, and his main focus was security. Peace for Israel means security, and we must stand with all of our might to protect its right to exist. It should be noted here that the date,
March 26, 1968, was some 9 months after Israel's 1967 or Six-Day War, a war in which it defended itself against Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, and was in possession of lands that it no longer possessed now. At no time did Dr. King ever dismiss Israel as a colonial or an imperialist power. He just simply said, Israel has the right to exist, and we must protect its sovereignty. On the other hand, we must see what peace for the Arabs mean in a real sense of security on another level. Peace for the Arabs means the kind of economic security that they so desperately need. These nations, as you know, are part of that third world of hunger, of disease, of illiteracy. I think that as long as these conditions exist, there will be tensions. There will be the endless quest to find scapegoats. So there is a need for a Marshall Plan for the Middle East, where we lift those who are at the bottom of the economic ladder and bring them into the mainstream of economic security. Finally, Dr. King turned his attention to the Arab or Palestinian people, and his main focus this time was economic security. Dr. King said that there should be a Marshall Plan that was directed to lift the Arab people out of poverty and bring them into the mainstream of economic security. Here it should be noted that over the last 19 years, the Palestinian Authority has received the equivalent of 25 Marshall Plans, tens of billions of dollars to go to do exactly what Dr. King advocated, yet poverty persists in the Palestinian territories. Mahmoud Abbas, Palestinian Authority president, makes a reported $1 million a month. The Palestinian Authority itself receives an annual budget of about $2 billion. In the area of Gaza, population of about 1.6 million, Hamas, the ruling party, boasts some 1,700 millionaires. We don't know exactly what Dr. King would say if he were here, but we would have to assume that when he said Marshall Plan, he was not talking about wealth for the upper echelons of the rulership and poverty for the rest of the Palestinian people.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Abolishing the Trans-Saharan Slave Trade. We are very grateful you could join us. My name is Maria Washington, and I will be your host. Dr. Charles Jacobs will be sharing about the modern-day slave trade in his work freeing African slaves for nearly 3 decades. And I see we have more people coming in, so let me let them in. All right, he will be interviewed by IBSI board member Olga Mishwe Washington. Once they are finished, we will take questions and comments, which you can submit via Zoom chat. Also, following this coming video that'll be coming up after I speak, I will hand it off to our executive director, Joshua Washington, for further comments, and then we will begin.
Zionism in the Black church, why standing with Israel will be a defining issue for Christians of color in the 21st century. Zionism in the Black church is a historic look at the 3,000-year relationship between Africa and Israel and the century-long synergy between Black and Jewish Americans, what the current challenges are, and why there's a bright path forward. It's a discussion of the Bible, music, politics, culture, and tradition. It's a story of tragedy and triumph, of pain and promise. It separates truth from fiction, reality from deception. It examines what came before in order to truly understand where we are now. It exposes decades of exploitation and reveals a remarkable persistence and strength of people whose destiny is bound together. A powerful destiny, a beautiful destiny. Zionism in the Black church, why standing with Israel will be a defining issue for Christians of color in the 21st century, by Dumisani Washington.
Once again, good evening. This is the first of a series that we'll be having every first Monday. I'm really excited to have Charles with us, Charles Jacobs, and I'll tell you more about him in just a moment. But I want to say, first of all, that IBSI, this is an issue that is very close and near and dear to IBSI. Because IBSI is dedicated to strengthening ties between Israel and Africa, and also Black-Jewish relations here in the United States. This is something that's very close to us, this topic. And although this is something that concerns IBSI greatly, our board member, Olga Mishwe Washington, is a South African native. And this is something that hits home for her. It's very close to home, which is why, even though regularly I will be hosting and interviewing, this particular one, I asked Olga to host this one. So she'll be a part of this. She'll be talking to Dr. Charles Jacobs, and we'll also have another guest with us. So I'm really excited to have them here today. And I'm very, very pleased that Charles is with us. He's done a lot of incredible work in the area. As you know, this webinar is called Abolishing the Trans-Saharan Slave Trade. And Charles has done so much work in that space. We're gonna have him share more about that. And so Olga, I'm gonna hand this off to you. And I hope you all enjoy this webinar this evening.
Thank you, Joshua. It's an absolute honor to be able to lead this first webinar, and even more so of an honor to be able to do so in conversation with the incredible Dr. Charles Jacobs. Dr. Charles, welcome. How are you today?
Oh, thank you so much, Olga. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad to be here.
Great. Well, we've got a lot to get through, so let's jump right into it. In preparation for this evening, I mentioned to a number of people that, did you know that slavery still exists in Africa? And many people are like, no, Olga, if we knew about it, or rather, if we don't know about it, it means that it doesn't exist. So can you please tell us your story of how you discovered the fact that slavery still exists and what you've been doing over the last few decades?
Well, first of all, you know, it's a perfect time to talk about slavery because just exactly 245 years ago plus one day, this nation declared itself independent with the words, all men are created equal. We declare these principles self-evident, all men are created equal. So it's a perfect time. Slavery is not a white sin. Slavery is a human sin. Your listeners should know that every civilization had slaves. The Romans had slaves, the Christians had slaves, the Jews had slaves, the Muslims had slaves, the blacks had slaves, the whites had slaves, Chinese, every civilization has had slaves. The question is, how did they who got rid of it and where is it not gotten rid of? So I found out about 25 years ago that you could buy and sell Black people in Africa for about $40 a piece. And I found it out by reading a magazine, which on page 47 in a little tiny print had a bit of an article about what was happening in Sudan and Mauritania, where Arabs had enslaved Blacks. And it's a politically sensitive topic, which is one of the reasons it's not discussed. But we know, I mean, all Americans have studied in depth the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. We know when it began, we know when it ended. We know that there were about 11 million Black people enslaved and taken here. But what we don't know is about the 11 million other Blacks who were taken into the Arab world by the Trans-Saharan slave trade. And so I found this out. I couldn't believe it. Just like many people are shocked today, I couldn't believe it. And I went and I met people from Sudan in New York, and I met people from Mauritania in New York, the diaspora peoples. And they told me that they were knocking on the doors of churches, they were knocking on the doors of human rights community, to tell the story, the Sudanese story, that there was a holy war declared from the Arab North against the mostly Christian South, where Arab militia, armed by Khartoum and with war cries of jihad, would storm African villages, shoot the men, and capture the women and children as slaves. And they had been trying to tell people about this, and nothing was happening. And so I organized a coalition of Sudanese and Mauritanians and abolitionists in America. And finally, we broke the story in the New York Times with an op-ed that I wrote with a Mauritanian about this, and that exploded. I mean, people all over America wanted to know more about it. We began the American Anti-Slavery Group, and we proceeded to educate the country. We testified to Congress. We met with Madeleine Albright. We met with President Bush, and we did everything we possibly could. We went to the Black community. We had allies across the political spectrum, which would be more difficult today, right? I mean, we had people on the left and people on the right and people on the middle, because slavery is against what America is all about. This country, people disagree about everything, but we all agree that no man should own another. So it's a longer story, but essentially we got the message out, and it got to President Bush, George Bush, W. Bush, and he forced Sudan to allow the Blacks in the South to vote on whether they wanted to separate from the Arab North. And of course, they voted 99.9999% yes. And South Sudan is the world's newest country. So.
Dr. Charles, you mentioned that you came across this 25 years ago, and you spoke specifically now of two countries, Sudan and Mauritania. Are there only two countries today that still have slavery, or are there more countries in Africa?
There are today at least 5 countries that we know of that where it's documented that slavery exists. All the slavers are Arabs and or Muslims, and all the slaves are Black, mostly Christians. In Sudan, even though the war has ended, and even though the South has its own country, there are about 35,000 slaves left. And there's a wonderful organization called Christian Solidarity International that seeks to still free these slaves. They're the heroes of the entire enterprise in Sudan. In Mauritania, the Arab Muslim world conquered Mauritania centuries, 8 centuries ago, 9 centuries ago, converted the Blacks to Islam, and yet still the Arab Berbers enslaved, today it's estimated about 500,000 people. Even though according to the Quran, you're not supposed to enslave fellow Muslims, as in the West, racism trumps religious doctrine, and there are about 500,000 Mauritanian slaves. And the tortures that they endure are unimaginable and have been documented by Human Rights Watch. In Nigeria, which is very important right now, I don't know how many people on this call, on this program, remember that Michelle Obama was very upset when Boko Haram captured the schoolgirls, and she had hashtag bring back our girls. Bring back our girls. Well, she was enthused for about 3 minutes. I don't know exactly why, but that just kind of disappeared. However, there is a Nigerian American movement that has just started to free the slaves of Nigeria. And they're suffering pretty much the same thing that the Sudanese. That is, Boko Haram is an Islamist group. The Fulani tribe is Islamist. They storm Christian villages. They slaughter the pastors. They capture the school boys and girls, and they take them off and force them to convert to a faith not their own. If you want to see this, go to freenigerianslaves.org. And this movement now is having its 3rd public protest in New Jersey on the 24th of July, and they need support because we learned that Americans are very interested in freeing Black slaves. It's just that it's a politically incorrect kind of slavery where white people are not the oppressors. And that's a big problem for the human rights community, which seems to focus on the sins of whites rather than on the human rights of everyone. As people in Africa escape the violence of jihad in the center of the country, Africans seek to go north to try to get to Europe. And when they do, they're often captured and enslaved in Algeria and in Libya. CNN has a horrifying report, which I think I've sent you, a videotape of an auction of two black men who are sold by Arabs for $400 a piece. So the problem here is that it's a politically incorrect kind of slavery, as I said, and the good white progressives who are so interested in declaring themselves I'm not a bad white guy, don't feel that this story where non-whites are enslaving blacks is helpful to their desire to be freed of white guilt. And so this is a horrible sin on their part. The human rights community, I think, is a sham because of this. And it's allowing all kinds of people in the Islamic world to suffer in silence, whereas the most important power that exists on the earth to free people from slavery is in the United States. So it's a damn shame that Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International is kind of silent on this, and if it treats it at all, puts it on the back burner.
So Charles, you've mentioned 4 countries: Nigeria, Sudan, Mauritania, Libya, which is a 5th country. And
Algeria is the other place where, as Africans seek to escape the horrors in the center of the country, they're captured in Algeria as well.
You mentioned that more information, more noise would be made about this, but for the fact that it's politically incorrect. And having access to the JW show, which I'll tell our audience a little bit about a little later in the show, I heard you use the term human rights fraud in relation to it not being politically correct. Could you please tell us a little bit about this fraud?
Yes, I mean, most people who join Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, the 2 biggest human rights organizations, are decent white people who, when they see sins committed by people like themselves, rush to the front and want to change that so that they can be guilt-free, so that they can proclaim themselves, I am not the bad white, all right? But when they see crimes committed by non-whites, they're hesitant for many reasons. They think that because the West has sinned in this way in the past, that it may not have the moral standing to criticize others, right? Who are we who had slaves to criticize others? But I think more, and that's foolish, because we've cured ourselves of the slavery. We fought a war where 600,000 people died in the Civil War to save our souls and the freedom of others from this scourge. And yet the Islamic world has not. And so they're hesitant. I think the reason that it's a fraud is because it puts the expiation of white guilt ahead of the saving of people and of the human rights for all people who are under terror that's not white, whose oppressors are not white. And you can see the same thing with the treatment of women in the Islamic world. You know, the feminist women movement here continues to undergo enormous criticism for its silence, because for the same reason, it won't speak up about what's happening to women in cultures that are not white. And you can see the same thing about what's happening to Christians all over the Middle East. Christianity used to be, 14 or 15% of the Middle East. It's now 2 or 3% because it's being driven out by radical Islam. And yet we see no protest except by people, those who are called right-wing Christians, but we see no protest on the part of the human rights community. So it's a fraud.
So say it differently, if people did not just identify the fact that the oppressors are not the right skin color based on today's politics, we'd be seeing much more done about this issue. Well, you know that if the people who had Black slaves today in Sudan, Mauritania, Nigeria, Libya, were white, Amnesty International would shut down New York City with huge marches of 300,000 people, right? You know that. The New York Times would have it on the front page, how bad, white sin, free the Blacks.
But the blacks are not going to be freed by people like that, because they don't care about that. They care about, I'm not a bad white person.
You mentioned the slaves being owned by Arabs, the slaves being owned by Muslims. Have you been accused of being Islamophobic in those statements and in that confirmation, or at least saying who the slave owners are? And if I could also ask you along the same lines, is your work then not akin to being Islamophobic, freeing black slaves, freeing African slaves, being Islamophobic?
Well, of course, I've been accused of that and worse. Yes, of course. I mean, we had a big fight with Louis Farrakhan, and this is interesting. Farrakhan's job is to convince black people in America that Islam is the path to freedom. Well, when there are reports of Muslims enslaving blacks all over Africa, this makes his job a bit more difficult. And see, he was rather annoyed with us, and he attacked us. I mean, there's a cartoon he put in his newspaper of me pretending to be for freedom, but really as the Jew who owns all the slaves. You know, he wrote a book that it was the Jews who were behind the slave trade, and it's called The Secret Relationship Between the Blacks and the Jews. You know, that's the cartoon. It doesn't look like me, but that's me with the kippah, the yarmulke on his head. And
he tried his best, but didn't do a good job.
Didn't do a good job. So actually, it's Farrakhan who has a secret relationship with the slavers, not me. He was paid by Muammar Gaddafi millions of dollars. Bill Clinton had to stop Gaddafi from sending Farrakhan millions and millions of dollars in order for Farrakhan to lead an Islamic revolution in America. So he was not happy with this, and he would not be happy with any abolitionist effort, because it would show that Islam is the one that needs to reform. So we're not Islamophobic. I have Muslim friends. I wrote my New York Times article with a Muslim from Mauritania named Mohammed Atiye on the board of my current institution, Americans for Peace and Tolerance. We have a sheikh, a reformist Islamic sheikh. Many of the slaves that we redeemed in Sudan, I haven't told you yet that I went to Sudan several times and redeemed slaves for cash. Many of those slaves were Muslims captured, living among the Christians. So I freed Muslim slaves. Louis Farrakhan hasn't freed a Muslim slave. So
that's an interesting thing. So you've actually gone to Africa and freed slaves yourselves. Can you tell us a little bit about that trip?
Yeah,
You've done that. Sorry,
I was there. I went there 3 times. I think Josh has a couple of photographs of it. I was there 3 times. The heroes here is that group that I mentioned before, Christian Solidarity International, CSI, which still seeks which is still getting slaves out of Sudan right now. They had arranged that's me in Sudan. And this fellow on my right with my arm around him is the man who helped Lord Fauntleroy, his name is. Walter Fauntleroy, he's a pastor, and he was the one who organized the March on Washington, Martin Luther King's March on Washington. The man all the way to the other side is Joe Madison, and he was and is called the Black Eagle. He runs Washington, D.C. Black radio talk show. And we all went to Sudan with Christian Solidarity International. I had more hair then. And the way that it worked was that CSI identified Arab traders that lived close to the line of battle in the South, and they made a deal with the Black Christians in the South, the Dinka people, and the deal was that you Arabs can trade in our markets, and you can water and feed your cattle on our lands if you go to the north and help us get our slaves back. We'll give you money to buy them back. You can find them, you can steal them, whatever you do. And tens of thousands of slaves were brought back to Sudan. to South Sudan, where they went home, and we redeemed these slaves, and it was the best. Aside from being married and being a father, it was the best thing that I ever did.
That's absolutely amazing. I've also had the opportunity to see, and I'm going to ask Joshua to pull this picture up, of you sitting down and being surrounded by many Sudanese youth with these amazing smiles. Once Joshua pulls that picture up, can you tell us where and when this happened? Yes.
Yeah, this was in the mid-1990s. You can see the bag of food, CSI, Christian Solidarity International. This is when we went to Sudan. By the way, this was an illegal trip. We flew, and I can't even say how we flew. Many planes, many very small planes, into villages in South Sudan. The experience was absolutely amazing. The Arab slave retrievers would bring hundreds of people under huge shade trees in the middle of the desert, my goodness. And we would approach them, and John Eibner, who was the hero of Christian Solidarity International, had duffel bags of cash, and he would sit down with the Arab retrievers, and there are photos of this as well, and he would pay for the slaves, and at a certain point, he would stand up and he would say, you are now freed. And it was like, if I tear up when I think of that. It's the most amazing thing to have these people. And then their families who had gathered around a couple hundred yards away ran, and they whooped and cheered, and they were freed. And so how many people, I've been blessed to see such a thing 3 times.
I see a number of very young youth in this picture. What is the age range of the slaves that you're aware of?
So these boys were not the slaves themselves. They were the local villagers who, the slaves didn't look so good. Actually, they looked pretty healthy, these fellows. The slaves were, they could be as young as, 6 or 7 years old. They're mostly women, actually, because unlike in the West, there was no need for musculature to do tobacco farms and cotton farms. This was all about concubinage. This was all about jihad slavery, where the womb of the woman was the weapon. The womb was the weapon of further jihad. So they would become impregnated, and their children would be Muslims. And they were mostly Christian girls. And I interviewed many of them. When I went to Sudan, I went 3 times, and the stories they told me were just, horrific. They would force the girls, they would rape the girls, they would take them. It's just horrible. So it's a different kind of a slavery than we know.
It's not a nice thing to talk about, but I do think that it's something that's important to alert to everybody that's joined in the webinar, and that's some of the types of torture that the slaves are subjected to. In particular, I've heard of 2 types of torture, one being the camel treatment and the other one being the insect treatment. Could you explain these 2 to us, please?
Yeah, it's not, you're right, it's not nice to talk about. So this is in Mauritania, and this was documented and written about, and that's how I learned about it from Africa Watch, which became Human Rights Watch. So, in the South, if a slave didn't do exactly as his master wanted, he was called uppity. Well, if you're in Mauritania and you broke a dish, or you woke up late, or you lost a goat, your master's goat, you could be tortured. And the camel treatment was especially horrific. They wouldn't let a camel drink water for a long time until his stomach shrunk. And then they would tie this offending uppity slave to the belly of the beast with his hands up above his neck and his feet around his belly. And then they would take the camel, tie him tight. And then they would take the camel to drink. And as the belly expanded, the slave's arms were, bones were taken out of their sockets. In insect treatment, they would take little tiny desert insects and stick them in the ear of the offending uppity slave, and then put stones in and wrap a towel around his head tight so that he couldn't, and tie his hands behind. And if left like that for days, the man would go insane. And there were more, but that's what I read in Human Rights Watch, Africa Watch. So the horrible thing for us was we couldn't get Americans in the human rights community to care. We got all kinds of other Americans to care. You know, we got Barney Frank on the left, Pat Robertson on the right in my coalition. Of course, we couldn't put them in the same room, but being against slavery made them partners in this. We had the NAACP. Coretta Scott King got interested in this, and she came to Boston to give me an award for freeing slaves. So it's possible to do again, and that's what I want to do. Well, that's what I'm helping the Nigerian Americans try to do again. It's possible to do this all over again. That's Coretta Scott King. That's the mayor, former mayor of Boston, who's Thomas Menino, who passed away. And I'm getting the Boston Freedom Award in the shape of the Liberty Tree in Boston. And that was very, very nice, 2001, I think.
Amazing.
So,
Dr. Jacobs, you use the word again. Are you saying it's possible to do it again because the support from these individuals, the support from these different groups has waned? Or is there another reason that this has not been able to continue and gain momentum as it was in the past, or as it has?
Yes, yeah, there's a few reasons why it's going to be more difficult, but it's still going to be possible, I believe. It's more difficult because everything is politicized in America now. It was not the case so badly 20 years ago, not so badly. Right now, if you went to liberal congressmen and you said to them, Blacks are being enslaved in Africa, and they would say, well, who's doing it? And if you said Muslims or Arabs, they would be frightened. They would be reticent. Most of them, I believe. We're trying. That wasn't not so much the case in the year 2000 and 2005. So I think it's going to be more difficult. On the other hand, the Nigerians in America are a wonderful diaspora group. They are extraordinarily successful. They're prosperous. They're doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, college professors. And so when they get it together to have this, and this is happening now, I think this will spread and spread and spread. And I think more people hear about this, the more people will be outraged, because it's not a matter of left and right. It's a matter of right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. And people's lives, literally.
And people's lives. I mean, as we talk now, I mean, there are jihad raids against Black villages in Nigeria, and people are being killed and enslaved. And you don't find it on the pages of the New York Times. You don't find it hardly anywhere. And that has to change. And I'm trying to help make that change. And it's similar to what happened in Sudan.
So we have the blessing of actually being joined by somebody who was a slave, but has, thank God, found his freedom. But before we welcome him onto the panel for this discussion, I'd like for the viewers to watch the short clip of the CNN footage that you referred to a few moments ago, where an able-bodied man was being auctioned so they can see it for themselves. And while we're setting that up, this happened in 2017, this particular report, but as we've heard from Dr. Charles, this is still ongoing.
A man addressing an unseen crowd. Big strong boys for farm work, he says. 400. 700. 700. 800. The numbers roll in. These men are sold for 1,200 Libyan pounds, $400 a piece. You are watching an auction of human beings. Another man, claiming to be a buyer. Off camera, someone asks, what happened to the ones from Niger? Sold off, he's told. CNN was sent this footage by a contact. After months of working, we were able to verify the authenticity of what you see here. We decided to travel to Libya to try and see for ourselves. We're now in Tripoli and we're starting to get a little bit more of a sense of how this all works. Our contacts are telling us that there are 1 to 2 of these auctions every month and that there is one happening in the next few hours. So we're going to head out of town and see if we can get some sort of access to it. For the safety of our contacts, we have agreed not to divulge the location of this auction, but the town we're driving to isn't the only one. Night falls. We travel through nondescript suburban neighborhoods, pretending to look for a missing person. Eventually,
In the interest of time, we're going to end it there. But what we will do is, in sending out our next IBSI newsletter, we'll include a link to that so that our viewers can for themselves view that clip in its entirety as well as read that article. So if you have not yet signed on for IBSI's newsletters, please will you do so. Francis, are you there, my brother?
He's muted.
You're on mute, sir. Francis? You're on mute. Do you want to unmute yourself?
I don't know if he knows how. There you go. Good.
Good morning, my brother. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And my greeting to all of you and Dr. Charles and Dr. Washington, Josh Washington, and every participant and all our viewers around the world.
So for those that have just heard me say good morning to my brother Francis, he is currently in Khartoum in Sudan, where it is what? Almost 3 in the morning? That's right. So you stayed up early.
2:38 in the morning, yes, indeed.
2:38. And thank you so much for making yourself available. We are hopefully going to be able to keep you for the entire time, hoping that the Wi-Fi participates. Brother Francis, you were once a slave, but thank God you are now free. Can you please very briefly describe to us how you became a slave and give us 1 or 2 experiences as a slave? And then lastly, tell us your story of freedom.
First of all, let me once again wish my all-American citizens a happy belated July 4th. And I just want to apologize in case that I may cut off because it says my internet width is actually low, and I just warn you on that, so bear with me. Thirdly, I can barely hear you well, and I hope you all hear me well, because that's the most important part, because it is about my story that I'm about to share with you.
We hear you.
But all in all, Dr. Charles has given, all in all, Dr. Charles Jacobs, whom I am indebted, and all my people, the people of South Sudan then, and now people of Republic of South Sudan and people of Sudan, partly from Western Sudan and Darfur, and also in Côte d'Ivoire, in Nuba Mountains, in Blue Niles, in every corner of Sudan where the Sudanese people were marginalized and enslaved. 25 years ago, literally, if you invited me exactly in 1996, in any month of 1996, I would have not been here with you, sharing with you my story. In 1996, I was still lying awake at night and wonder who will come and free me. Just as today, millions of men and women, children across the 5 African countries that is still practicing slavery with impunity from the sitting government, from all these countries that I mentioned, from Nigeria to Sudan to Algeria to Niger to Libya. These countries are still yet practicing slavery with nobody saying anything or do anything about them. All of you just watched the last video that you premiered for us. That video, whenever that I see it, it really horrifying me. It reminds me my own struggle for 10 good years in captivity. When I used to lie awake at night and wonder who will come and free me tomorrow or any other day that I feel I should be home with my family. But people like Charles Jacobs, who given so much of their own personal effort to spread awareness in the United States and to mobilize the leaders of that country, from Congress, the US Senate, to the presidents, including President George W. Bush, who have given some office to ensure that the people of South Sudan, or Southern Sudanese at the time, are freed. I didn't get my freedom through someone coming to buy me out, but through God and through my own struggle, where I made multiple attempts, where I became successful many years afterwards and went to Egypt as a refugee like any other immigrants. I was lucky to be given refugee status to go to the United States as a refugee. But when I went to US, I actually thought that I was done with my own struggle. I freed myself and I should live my life as like any other immigrant who came from any other part of the world to the USA. But that's not what their story was. Immediately, I thought of my people because I knew nobody knew about their stories. Because I look strange whenever that I share my story, because I was in my 20s, going from 19, going to 20 years old, practicing how to ride bicycles, going to a nearby store, Big Mart, just to stare on the things that are being displayed. Because these are things that I don't have and I never saw or never in my life witnessed.
Francis?
I used to go up in a snowy day.
Francis, if I can interject just to make sure that our participants are following us. So you were 19 years old when you obtained your freedom by escaping, and then you came here to the United States. Is that what you said?
Yes, I actually was 18 going to 19 when I went to the United States in 1999.
And you'd been a slave for 10
literally,
years prior?
I didn't actually get...
You'd been a slave for 10 years prior?
Can you... I was a slave for 10 years in Sudan at the time. And then I escaped in 1996. In 1998, exactly, I went to Egypt. And I went to Egypt by land. It took me exactly traveling from Sudan to Egypt by taking a bus, from a bus to a train taking actually a boat crossing the Mediterranean Sea to Aswan, and from Aswan, which is part of Egypt, bordering Sudan and Egypt, I went to Cairo. It was a long journey that was never guaranteed that I will make it. But I thank my God that I was able to survive and made it like any other immigrants. My story did not end there. I actually joined many other refugees who were applying for refugee status and went to the United States.
Francis,
but soon I went to US.
Can you tell us, please, what a day was like as a slave, for those who may be wondering? Tell us about the day that you were enslaved, and then one other example of a day in a slave's life.
You know, I think the pandemic, if anything that I could a little bit relate to what I went through for 10 good years, the pandemic actually went for good 8 months or a year, literally, since it started in 2019. And we all complain about being locked down, not going outside or associating with people. But in my story, imagine 10 good years having no one to talk to, no one to love me. I never have a choice to say this is what I should do or shouldn't do. So freedom means when you are free to speak however way that pleases you, or do things in the way that pleases you, not the way that pleases the others. That was the absolute opposite of my 10 years in captivity. I was actually dehumanized. I was denied to talk to people. I only talk to people when they want to talk to me about what I should do for them. I was taught to say yes, even when it's a big no. That how was my day. Each day is just another day, but the same story every day. And that's what actually made me ask three critical questions one at a time to my master. Why they call me a beat, and why they force me to sleep with the animals, and why nobody loves me. These three questions almost ended my life.
I'm going to interrupt you because I think it's important that our viewers don't miss that. Did you say that your master called you a beast? So she likened you to an animal?
No.
My master one time called me an animal because I asked them three questions. Why nobody loves me, and why they forced me to sleep with the animals, because I would isolate from the people. Their own children, biological children who are younger than me, or some are my age, come to me to just abuse, spy on me, or do anything that would please them and make them happy, and nobody ever say anything to them. And I can't even fight back or say anything because I'm not allowed. So when I asked my master why they called me a beat and they forced me to sleep with the animals, and why nobody loves me, he came back and stood in front of me and said, the reason we called you a beat because you are an animal.
For those who may not be
absolute.
For those who may not be familiar with that term, I misheard it as
a beat means a beat is like an N-word in the United States.
Ah, an N-word, and that's A-B-E-E-D.
Because I think I'm still having N-word.
Are you still with us, Francis? Dr. Charles, while we're waiting for Francis.
I did not hear the last part of the question he asked.
No challenge. I'm going to go back to Dr. Charles and then I'll come back to you, Francis.
Hello?
Dr. Charles, those that are watching may be wondering, this is IBSI, the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel. What does this have to do with Israel? What does the enslavement of Africans today have anything to do with Israel? What would your answer to that be?
Yeah, that's a good question, because the forefront of anti-Semitism today is a critique of Israel and is the denial of the Jewish people's right to have a homeland. And as part of that ideological mechanism, they have invented something called intersectionality. And intersectionality means that all of the people who are supposedly victims of the white patriarchy have to join together and support each other's causes. Now, that says something about the Blacks, the Arabs, the Muslims, and the Jews. So the Blacks are said to be the most victimized of all the victimized classes. But also the Arabs and the Muslims are also supposed to be marginalized minorities. And so they should join together, the Blacks and the Muslims and the Arabs, to support each other's causes. And the Jews are now said to be white people, or now they have a new word, adjacent whites, where white people, prosperous and all of that. So this entire attack on the Jews is led from the left and from the Muslim world by this flawed conception of who is whose friend. Well, the Jews, as your father-in-law's book shows better than anything I've seen, it was the Jews who were friends of the Blacks way before the civil rights movement and beyond, helping with all of the things that they could help with. And now they are being forced out of friendship with the Blacks by Black radicals and Islamists. And the Jews also helped free the Black slaves in Sudan. And that was led by me, who is a Jewish Zionist. And so we can free the Black slaves of the Islamic world. We can lead in it. We can help in it. So Black people today need to know the true story of who are their better friends and who are not. The main anti-Semite in America, the most dangerous anti-Semite in America is Louis Farrakhan, I believe. You can have a Nazi on a street corner and somebody might punch him in the face. No one is going to go walk up to Louis Farrakhan and punch him in the face. He has enormous sway and influence, even into Congress, even with former presidents and presidents, even with, I just saw a movie where he was toured around the Black Congressional Caucus from congresswoman to congressman. And so he hates Jews and is one of our most dangerous foes. It would be important to say to him, why don't you help Black people understand that there are slaves today owned by your fellow co-religionists? And don't you think that you have an obligation to I mean, if anybody could free the slaves tomorrow in all of Africa, it would be Louis Farrakhan, right? I mean, imagine if Louis Farrakhan stood up and said, my goodness, these Muslims have made a mistake. They've misread the Quran. They have misread their heritage. Okay, we must free the slaves. And you know what? All of Congress would jump. All of the human rights community would jump, but he won't do it. So I think that it's an important part of IBSI's agenda, because Black people in America are strong and powerful and free, and they're not victims. And they have holy power. They have the power that came from shedding blood on the buses in the South, from shedding blood to fight for their freedom. And that power should be used to free the slaves that history has left behind, and they can do it. Black Americans can do it. And I think that's important.
Thank you for that. Francis, I'm hoping that the connection is better. So sorry that we weren't able to complete your story earlier, but thank you for sharing it. Can I ask you this? You mentioned coming to the United States and still doing work. Many of the questions that I'm seeing on the chat are alluding to the question of what can we do? What is your answer to what can be done? What are you doing currently? And what would you want others like myself and others that are watching this webinar to do?
He's muted.
Is there a question to me? If I heard well, did you ask me what I expect people like you to do or American to do? That's the question, Ms. Washington?
So it's a twofold question. The one is that you spoke to the work that you do, that you currently are raising awareness and you still are doing something. So why do you do that? And then what would you like for us to do? Many of the questions that are in the chat are saying, what can we do? What can we do? What do you tell us?
Excellent question. Thank you very much. Well, one thing, let me just say it. I have known Dr. Charles Jacobs for over 2 decades now since I went to the United States. And just for your information and everyone here, I refer to Dr. Charles Jacobs as my American father. And he's truly is. He's a father of many, many Africans, many other young men and women that he have liberated and actually meant to become the people they are. So my job is to dedicate my own story as a living proof, someone who have once lived, by sharing my own testimonies, speaking out, spreading awareness, and educating everyone that is not aware that slavery still exists. Because many people believe in the United States, and I believe also in other parts of the world, that slavery ended with American slave trades that ended in 1865. I would tell people to think again, because the video we saw earlier was in 2007, and that was our own best news cable premiering that video, CNN. 2 Black brothers being auctioned away for $400, something that hurts me. So I am doing whatever I can as individual and with the group like American Anti-Slavery Group, and with you and with many other coalitions that are fighting for these injustices, so that we eradicate slavery once and for all, that will make the governments and the people who does it, the perpetrators, being put in the book of judgment. So because they are doing something that should be done to any human beings. What I expect of people like you and others, whoever think that this is none of their business because it's not happening to you, it just knows that a pandemic was something happening far away in 1 or 2, 3 countries, but it has affected all of us in one way or the other. The whole world actually suffered from 8 months of pandemic. My heart goes to those who have lost their loved ones. So slavery is still the same injustice that Dr. Martin Luther King talks. That injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. So we must stand up for ourselves. We must stand up for our brothers, whether they're African, like my people in the 5 African countries, or they are anywhere. I also want to mention some things. Something that we all forget. Jewish community have stood with us, and I relate their stories to like a story of my own people of South Sudan. When Dr. Charles Jacob first asked me to watch the 10 Commandments movie in 2000, and then I have a speech movie of late Martin Luther King Jr. These movies tend me to become the man I am today. One, when the Moses spoke to the Jewish people and to the Pharaoh that let my people go when they were enslaved in Egypt, which is not far away from where I'm speaking today, because Sudan is not far away from Egypt. When I saw the sea open for the people of Jews to cross freedom, I was relieved, and I said, and I used to actually teach my Jewish people, I hope that the sea will open for my people one day, the people of Southern Sudan then. And I want to admit that the sea is open for us. Now we have our own independent country. We are not any longer the second-class citizens. We have our own internal issues, but we are independent. We are not any longer being actually enslaved or ruled by people who look at us as their own properties by selling and buying us. So that movie made me the man I become today. And also when I saw Martin Luther King speaking in that crowd, saying that I have a dream. I spoke in the same place, Charles Section, Manny take me there. I didn't have the same crowd, but I spoke there in a Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. I said I too have a dream for my people, and I hope one day my people will be free at last. Amen. We are just struggling because the question is, what is good my freedom if my people are still held in bondage? Even after the independence and the peace agreement that was signed in 2005 in my country, hundreds of thousands of my people remain in the north of Sudan today as I speak. Nothing was mentioned about them. Nobody talked about them. Even the international witness who were there, those who have actually witnessed the peace and grantor of the peace, CPA, Comprehensive Peace Agreement. This is just in Sudan. And I just talk about the 5 countries, which includes Sudan, that are still practicing slavery today. So we have to join hands together to fight and support the organizations that are doing incredible work, like your own organization, like American Anti-Slavery Group, whom I'm still a part of it, and have been dedicating their own effort to just spread awareness. So this is a broad question that I have not specific, but to recommend people that they should speak up, because you don't have to have a lot of money or be a great speaker in order to make a difference. You can make a difference in your own small ways, just like you just did this. So I'm proud to always say, I will not rest until I see my people and every human being is freed.
That's right. Thank you, Francis. Thank you so much for that. For everybody that's watching, in the chat section, many of the organizations that Francis spoke to, as well as Charles spoke to, are listed, and also in our recap of this particular evening's webinar, we'll include links to those organizations there. Dr. Charles, if I may ask, from one of our viewers, Alan, how many approximately slaves would you say there are in each of those 5 countries, if you know those figures off the top of your head? Or holistically, can you give us a round figure of how many Blacks still remain enslaved today?
In Nigeria, there are thousands and thousands, nobody really knows. In Mauritania, the estimates from official human rights groups range from 350,000 to 600,000. That's like 500,000 people there. In Sudan, the last bit of evidence that we have is about 35,000. In Libya and Algeria, nobody knows because these are people fleeing through those countries toward Europe. So it's very, very hard to know, but enough to start a movement to free them all. Because I have to say that once you see one freed slave, you know that a miracle has happened, and that's what we should do.
One other question from the audience. Because so many Muslims are going all over the world in Occidental countries since about 30 years, is that possible that there were some imams that decided to expand Islam in this particular way of slavery? And I think this was written or sent through by Ivan Ho. And I think he's linking it to the question that you asked earlier about the girls being impregnated and in that way becoming slaves as well, their children too, in Islam.
Well, there are many ways to expand Islam. Jihad is only the most obvious and violent one. Another is through colonization and settlement. And in fact, in America, when the FBI found secret documents of the Muslim Brotherhood, that's exactly, I think, the words that they used. This is an effort toward making settlement in America. We know that in Europe, Europeans are sorely tested right now by the massive numbers of Muslims, some of whom would probably like to become assimilated. And we do hear that there are more and more Muslims leaving their faith. However, most are not, and most in Europe, many in Europe seek to have separate communities, unguided by European countries' laws, not respecting the countries that they're in. And you can see this every day on the news, even, that I have to expand on that. So Islam is supposed to be an expanding militant culture, and that's what it's doing.
Well, we've reached the hour mark. We could speak on and on and on. This is such an important topic, and it's also a very layered topic. I'm hoping that we'll have another opportunity in the not too distant future. Dr. Charles, thank you so much for joining us this evening. My brother Francis, thank you so much for waking up, staying awake if you didn't go to sleep all the way there in Sudan. And to everybody that's been watching with us this evening, thank you for being with us. I'm going to hand over to Maria Washington, who introduced this webinar, for her to give us our closing remarks.
Thank you, Olga.
Thank you all, everyone, for attending IBSI's monthly webinar. I have a few announcements for us before we log off. Please be sure to share today's session from our IBSI Facebook page. We are live on there, so you'll be able to see the whole recording on there. You can also hear more about modern day slavery and the efforts to combat it on the JW Show, which is available on iTunes, Spotify, and Podbean. We also invite you to join our Executive Director, Joshua Washington, on Clubhouse this Wednesday with the Black Jewish Entertainment Alliance. Also this Sunday, July 11th, our founder and CEO, Dumasani Washington, will be live with Stand With Us co-founder and CEO, Roz Rothstein, to discuss his new book, Zionism in the Black Church, Why Standing With Israel Will Be a Defining Issue for Christians of Color in the 21st Century. Lastly, join us next month on August 2nd for our next webinar. We'll be hosting Carmel Melamed, a member of the Persian Jewish community in Los Angeles. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.